My name is Kelly Grizzle. I work for a company called SailPoint and do identity management there. I'm a software architect, so I've been writing code for ever, it feels like, doing identity management stuff. I've also been involved for the past 6 years working on SCIM and am an author, along with some of the others in this room, of the SCIM specs. I've spent time writing SCIM clients, SCIM servers, so I kind of know it from all aspects. So today we kind of have a fun little thing planned. We're going to do a choose your own adventure style of identity management to go through use cases. And y'all are going to be helping me out with audience participation, but in order to learn things, y'all have to be awful at this game. So make sure if an option looks not good, like not the one that you would circle on your test or bubble in on your Scantron, call out that one first, and we'll get there, okay? So yeah, without further ado, let's go on our journey, okay? You find yourself in a strange new place, Identity Land. Behind you lie the remains of shattered identity projects that went over budget and never lived up to their promises. Ahead of you is a murky forest filled with many dangers. Do you try to patch up the shattered projects or cast your hopes on a brighter future? Patch them up? Okay, let's try to patch them up. Oh, too bad. That was a bad choice, guys. All right. You spend the next 20 years wandering around Identity Land, and despite your best efforts, you continue to get bogged down in the tangles of yore. Exhaustion eventually overpowers you, and you die, alone, unhappy, and never achieving your full potential, just like your high school guidance counselor warned. All right, so let's look to a new hope now. Let's try to cast our future on a brighter hope. Oh, look, that was the right answer. Good choice. Identity Land may be scary, but it is ever-changing and full of wonderful things. In fact, with the proper guidance, you may find that life here will be much easier than you anticipated. Let's see. Are you guys into this? This is fun. I read these kind of books with my kids, and it's always exciting when they're like, use a samurai sword, and I'm like, no, don't do that. All right. As you wander through this new land, you soon recognize that you're not alone. There are many others that call Identity Land home. Through your rugged good looks, rapier wit, and of course, your organizational acumen, you quickly curry favor among the people of Identity Land. They thirst for a strong leader and ask you to be their king. Do you? A, politely decline so you can spend more time playing Call of Duty. Or B, accept the challenge. Call of Duty, of course. Who wouldn't? Oh, slacker. You let down the people in desperate need. You gain 20 pounds and lose all your friends. Identity Land remains a place of chaos, destined to become a lawless and desolate place. Too bad. What do you think? Should we try to be king? Let's do it. Yes! The king is dead. Long live the king. All right. So, your kingdom is burgeoning now. Joy! A new baby is born in your kingdom. As king, you are responsible for welcoming this new life into Identity Land, as well as documenting the new arrival. Do you? A, let the parents handle this. B, use the just-in-time baby registry system. Or C, try a novel new approach. Parents? They're responsible, right? They should be able to handle this. They are first-time parents, so you never know. Oh, no. The happy new parents quickly become overwhelmed and dismayed by the documentation that they have to fill out. This stress leads to a fight over what to name the baby, and they finally settle on Helga to spite one another. Dad is exhausted by his new duties and the ensuing fights and ends up filling out half of the paperwork incorrectly. Oh boy, that's bad news. I can sympathize with these folks. I have 11-year-old twins and an 8-year-old, but first kids were twins, and me and my wife looked pretty much like this right here. It was bad. Okay, so what do you say? Should we try out the just-in-time baby registry system? Yeah, let's do it. Oh, nice try, but it was a bad plan. Although the new child gets documented upon birth, the insurance company requires that the baby is pre-registered. So mom and dad have to pay 200 pieces of gold for a penalty. You know, the insurance company sort of tried to do this to me when my twins were born, and you realize how messed up insurance companies are because they had no problem with my son, but for my daughter, they claimed that I owed them all this money, and I was like, they were born on the same day, they have the same DNA practically, you know, what are you thinking? So, crazy. All right, let's try this novel new approach. Instead of encumbering the parents with mountains of error-prone paperwork, you decide that there must be a better way. You convene a group of advisors and dub them the smartest, creativist, innovativist men/women, aka SCIM. They put their minds to work and develop a system that will register the new child both with the kingdom and with the insurance company prior to birth. Success. Those advisors, you may be going back to them throughout this presentation, so remember these guys. Okay, over time, my slides are too big. They look great on my screen over here. They're going off up there. Over time, identity land starts to grow and flourish. However, with this prosperity, the existing structures start to show signs of strain. To combat this, you decree that each village must have a local governor, and you appoint able men and women to fill these roles. To make it official and stuff, you must deliver these decrees to the new leaders emblazoned with the seal of Identity Land. Do you send squires throughout the land, or do you try a novel new approach? Send the squires! Squires, come! All right, here we go. Oh. It takes weeks. I should have brought coconuts for this part. It takes weeks to round up a capable set of squires that speak all of the dialects across the land. Had it not been for Maine Framesington, this process could have gone a bit smoother. Unfortunately, the younger squires only know how to say, 2 beers, please, and where's the bathroom, in this ancient language used in this part of the kingdom. You're forced to rely on Roger to deliver this decree, who was old. Like, really old. The mountainous terrain leading to Maine Framesington proved too difficult a task for poor old Roger. Oh, sad. It's a sad story. Let's see what we can do. Oh, look. It's our old friends, the smartest, creativist, innovativist men/women. They reconvene, and they come up with a way to send decrees to all provinces at the same time. Not only does the decree make it to all destinations in record time, it is also sent in a standard dialect that can be understood by all. Yay! Huzzah! All right, so these new governors you appointed, they are really doing a bang-up job, and the tensions in the land begin to subside. As king, you decide to perform a census of the land. This will help you to better understand your kingdom and review any sub-decrees that may have been made by the governors. Do you send the squires? Or do you try something novel? Send the squires! Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for playing along. This would have gone a lot worse if y'all had been saying try something novel the first time. Everything. Okay. That's right. It would have been a fast journey. Have you learned nothing? Now that poor old Roger has met an untimely end, you're pretty much out of luck here. You're squireless. Oh, look, it's our old friends again. You assemble the creativist, smartest, creativist, innovativist men/women, and again they deliver. Building upon their systems for baby registration and decree management, they invent a way for each village to send a standardized census form back to the king. Sounds good, huh? Ah! Lo, there's trouble in the land. The census has revealed that the governor of Nefarious City has been unscrupulous in his dealings and has issued sub-decrees that allow his cronies to pillage the poor citizens of the region. What a dastardly fiend. Do you send a squire to revoke these decrees and sack the governor, or do you try something novel? Send the squire! Oh, what's this all about? You immediately send a squire to Nefarious City to remedy the situation. Unfortunately, the pull of corruption is too strong for this ignoble squire to resist. The governor issued him a sub-decree that granted him free beignets for life, and he fell to the dark power of sweet, fluffy deliciousness. Nefarious City remains under the thumb of this dastardly governor, and the people continue to suffer. Sounds strangely familiar. Yep. All right. The smartest, creativist, innovativist men/women unite. They devise a genius system that will automatically revoke the governor's decree and all sub-decrees issued by the governor. To top it off, a magical spell is cast on the governor that binds him in a dreadful dungeon where he spends the rest of his days being subjected to endless loops of Hootie and the Blowfish and The Bachelor. No! I can't think of a worse punishment. Congratulations! You've successfully navigated the perils of Identity Land. A long reign filled with peace and prosperity is surely in your future. Can I hear a huzzah? Huzzah! All right. So that was our identity adventure. Choose your own style. And, I just wanted to talk about some ways that we need to manage identities, and we can relate these to ways out in the real world now that people are trying to manage identities, and there's similar problems that you ran into. You got Roger, the only person who knows how to talk to a RACF system, and you got trouble on your hands, right? And so that was kind of setting the stage. Those are sort of some of the use cases we're going to talk through. For the rest of the time here, we're going to talk about how to do SCIM. And the first part of that is going to be a demo. I'm going to show an application that I made, showing off some of these use cases. We'll talk about what it takes and things to keep in mind if you're going to implement a client or a server in SCIM, as well as like some common gotchas. We did an interop, I guess Pam brought it up. Ian's going to talk about it. We did an interop on Monday, and we actually came up with some good things out of that where we need to be careful when we're implementing this stuff. And I think some of that will result in the spec getting refined a little bit, mainly just clarification points. But also it helped us to know when you're implementing, these sort of things happen. So, be careful in these areas, right? We'll follow up with going through some details about what has changed in 2.0 since 1.1. 2.0 came out in September, and it's kind of what everybody is beginning to implement now. And then finally, we'll talk about extensions and go a little deep into extensions, talking about how you might extend a SCIM server. And there's multiple ways to do that, and we'll kind of walk through those scenarios. So let's get going. I guess, let's do the demo. So fingers crossed here. All right. here we go. So essentially, to do this presentation, I wanted to get some more hands-on experience with some of the servers that we were testing with the interop, try to get some tips to hand along to you guys. So as part of that, I built a little application that does SCIM. It's a SCIM client, a SCIM 2.0 client. It's written in JavaScript, so all this stuff runs in the browser, and you'll see here in a sec all the types of things that it does. I've got a little bit of funkiness going on because the ways that browsers deal with external APIs, you need to set up cores for them to work well, which is something that you probably don't need to know too much about right now. But these demo servers that we have did not have this set up on, so I had to do a little bit of hacky stuff to kind of get around that. So, but it works. So let's log in here. Okay. All right. And so in the interop, there was 6 different companies interoping. There was 4 servers, I believe, as part of the interop. And so for the app that I built, I hooked it up to 3 of the different servers. And so what you're seeing here is an app that is going and it's making SCIM calls, REST calls, to these various servers. Here we are looking at Salesforce, and you can see, there's a number of users in Salesforce. It's using the pagination part of our filtering and searching API to be able to page through the results. It's using introspection on the server. It's going and asking the server, what resource types do you support? And through that, it populates this dropdown. So this is Salesforce. They support user and group, which are 2 standard object types, but they also have objects for entitlements and roles as well. And so if you go and say, I want to see entitlements, you can look through all the entitlements that are supported on Salesforce. Same thing for roles. Scroll through your roles.
How many could there possibly be?
Infinite. There's no bounds. And it's really up to the server to decide what objects are interesting for them to expose. And so one of the interesting things about SCIM is that it started as an identity management focused API. And with that, we needed to model identities and groups and maybe some other identity related concepts. But through it, we actually came up with sort of a way to define schemas and a way to define new object types. And so you can actually create new SCIM objects that have nothing to do with identity if you want to. And I've seen this be used in a lot of different novel ways. I've seen people do password change requests, have endpoints that are password change request endpoints, and you post to it and it creates this request, and you got to have the right token and all this sort of stuff for it. So there's a lot of different things. We'll, towards the end of the presentation, when we talk about extensions, we'll kind of walk through. We're going to have an internet-enabled toaster that we're going to model in SCIM, so you guys can see sort of the process around that. So we've got different servers hooked up here. This is SailPoint, the company I work for. We have a SCIM2 server. Allows you to do searching and whatnot. There you go. And finally, Unbound ID, which is another one of the very early adopters of SCIM. They've got a good server, pretty feature rich. So, this is a very small amount of JavaScript code that basically has about 3 lines of difference for each server. What URL are you hitting? What credential do you pass? And there's a little bit about the minimum required stuff when you want to create a user. And that's it. Everything else is super generic. So you got a list of these servers with their info, and that's it. And it was surprisingly very fast to slap this thing together. Pretty cool. So let's talk through a couple other use cases. So let's create a user. And we'll go in here and we'll kind of mimic we'll send it out to Salesforce or SailPoint and Unbound. Let's create our beautiful baby that joined us. Helga baby. All right, I'll give her an email address. And we hit create. And look, okay, it says we created the user on SailPoint and on Unbound ID. And so what just happened was we did 2 post calls, one to the SailPoint server, one to the Unbound ID server with the exact same payload, and it created these users. And so if we want to test that, we can go here and look for Helga, and there's Helga baby now in Unbound ID. And if we go over to SailPoint, hopefully she exists. There she is. Oh, we need a profile picture for her, I think. I'm sure she's cuter than her name implies. Okay, so a couple more scenarios we'll look at. One is synchronization. And so this is a very common use case that happens when you're doing identity management. Typically, you'll have a number of applications in your environment, and you need to get identity information from one to others. And so often this happens with like an HR system or maybe a corporate directory that serves as your source of truth, and users need to flow out of that into other systems, okay? And so for our example here, we will show a synchronization process. So let's go to Salesforce, and we'll click our Synchronize button up here. And it's asking, where do you want to send the users to? So let's send them to Identity IQ. And let's cross our fingers, because this is dicey. Oh, yes, it worked. Cool. So what just happened there is that we read the users from Salesforce.com and found 12 of them. We did some correlation, and so this is kind of a part where your app may need to have a little bit of smarts in it, or you may want to even rely on a identity access management type product to do this, because correlating user accounts across a lot of applications where the data may not always quite match up can be difficult. In this case, I'm doing something simple and just looking at username. You could look at external ID also, but it's searched on Identity IQ for each of these users, didn't find them, so it decided to create them. So we have 12 new users now. And I put an undo button in so that I can test this over and over. So that just went and deleted those 12. But we run it again. All right. So if we go over to Identity IQ now, we can look up Ian. There we go. So here's one that came from that Salesforce system right there. We just synced him into Identity IQ from Salesforce. So finally, I come to my senses and I'm like, why the hell am I letting Ian log into my system? This is a very bad idea. If you know Ian, you know what I'm talking about. So this is the termination case, right? This is the governor. We're going to lock him in the dungeon. Ian, I hope you like Hootie. Hootie. So you click terminate. What this is doing is it's going to Identity IQ, sending a delete request for Ian. There's been talk about different ways to do deletion, whether it be a hard delete where you actually kill that person and remove them from the data store completely, or whether you kind of archive them as some tombstone sort of record, or if you just do some sort of inactivation. And SCIM has kind of options 1 and 3 there. It doesn't have the idea of the soft delete yet. And so there's kind of work going on. Mortez has worked on it some. I know there's been various interests to do a soft delete where you can say, get rid of this guy, but don't really get rid of him because we need to be able to still see what he had 5 years from now or something like that. So Ian is gone now. If I go search again, he's gone from my system, thankfully. Can rest easy now. So that's pretty much it for the app. But yeah, like I said, what you got is a lot of JavaScript there, or actually a small amount of JavaScript, doing AJAX calls, sending SCIM requests, communicating identity information between 3 different servers that are talking the exact same language. And it really only took a few days to put together, which was awesome. I need to check with my company, but I'd like to. Yeah, I definitely would like to. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint because I've got some other stuff to talk about. Okay, so we have the demo, and now we're going to move on to talk about implementing a SCIM server or a client. So just here's some general tips if you're in the market to implement a SCIM server or client. First of all, SCIM 1.1 is going away. Nobody is writing new code for SCIM 1.1. There are some existing servers and stuff out there, but most providers are implementing 2.0 now. So if you're doing a server or client, I would recommend going with 2.0. It's a death notice. That's right. He's going the way of Roger. Sorry. Piece of advice number 2 is to use a library to get a jump start. And there's a few of these out here. Unbound ID has a library. They had a 1.1 library that they released, open sourced. They have another library that for 2.0 that is soon to be released. They're both Java. And there's some other libraries also. So look at simplecloud.info. SailPoint actually has one that we use internally. We use to build our client and our server. And in the interop testing, it just made things magically work together. There's 0 friction in trying to get those 2 pieces going together. So if you can use a library, I would highly recommend it. And the third piece of advice when you're starting is to start simple. The spec has a lot of things, and there's a number of things that not a lot of people implement or are maybe not interesting for the simplest of use cases. And so I would recommend just ignoring some stuff when you start out. So patch, leave it off to start. You'll probably want to add it, but leave it off to begin. Bulk, leave it off. You probably never need to add it. Nobody's implemented it yet. The .search endpoint, up to you, but I'd say just start with a get-based search first. /me, which is returning your own information to yourself, like the user info endpoint in OIDC. Leave that off because you can always go to the /users endpoint and get your own info. There's the ability to limit what comes back for in each response through these attributes and excluded attributes parameters. We found in the interop that a fair number of people did not implement those yet. It's good to have. I would recommend doing it eventually, but for your first pass, forget about it. It's not going to break anything if you put them in there. E-tags, they're more of an advanced concept. Don't do them. Filtering involves query parsing and things like that. So it would definitely be good to get there, but you can leave it off on first pass. So once you have that working, then look at what's most important for your implementation and start layering in the features that you didn't put in initially. The next advice comes from the perspective of writing a client. When we learned some things through the interop, and the first piece of advice is make your client resilient. Because through the interop, we learned that the servers don't always return exactly what you think they're going to return. And some of that is because you have hack programmers like Ian Glazer who are implementing the server. And sometimes that happens because there's spots in the spec that aren't quite clear about what should be returned. And those are things that we're going to try to address in the spec. those squishy parts. But even if the spec is perfect, there's still going to be some implementations out there that are not perfect. A good place to start is to read the /schemas endpoint, and that will help your client know what data to expect if the server has implemented it correctly. Sometimes servers require fields that aren't required in the core schema definitions, and so this is a good place to go and learn about that. You know, which fields are immutable on this server that may not be on other servers, which fields are required on this server that may not be on others. For example, Salesforce requires an entitlement when you create a user. So that's a good place to start. And then there are some headers that you should always pass. There's an accept header and there's a content type header. Accept is the client telling the server, hey, I want you to give me this kind of data back. And the only type that's supported in SCIM is this application /SCIM plus JSON. So always pass that up. If you're posting, putting, or patching data, make sure you include the content type header too, because it's telling the server, here's what I'm handing you. And so what we saw in interop testing at times was if you didn't specify this, sometimes the server got confused and it would just kind of blow up on you. So it's a good habit to get into. From the server perspective, things to look out for. And this was probably the biggest thing that we saw in the interop was that some clients can be really strict about reading responses. And so the SailPoint client is that way. What it does is it assumes that what the server tells it is true. And so it goes and it asks the server, it says, tell me about your resource types. And it saves that information. It says, tell me about your schemas, and it saves that information. And then as it's reading responses, it's assuming that those responses that are coming back, those users that are coming back, adhere to those schemas that they just retrieved. And you know, we found that sometimes that's not true. Resource types and schemas aren't always thought about first thing, but as you're doing a server, make sure that you pay attention when implementing these. And by the way, they may not match what the spec looks like exactly. Make sure to include both in your responses, like user responses, group responses, include the schemas attribute and return the meta resource type attribute. This is information that the client needs to know in order to determine how to parse the response and how to understand what it's getting back. And if you leave that out, then the client is kind of left in the dark and may have issues with that. We saw a lot of problems with dates. So dates use some sort of ISO, something stringified format, and some servers would return it with milliseconds, and some would return it without milliseconds, and some would miss a time zone or things like that. And if you don't return it correctly, a lot of times the client will die. So make sure you are doing your dates well. This one goes without saying, but require SSL and TLS. You've got very sensitive data going across the wire, and you know, perhaps passwords, perhaps social security numbers, entitlement information. So make sure that traffic is encrypted. And finally, as I learned the hard way with my JavaScript app, implement CORS, that's cross-origin resource sharing. And essentially what it is that the browser is deemed like this unsafe place, right? And so when you're calling to your own APIs, you know, on your own server, you can trust the content that's coming back. So there's no problems with that. But when I'm calling to, you know, evilskimprovider.com, they may be sending me back some JSON that, you know, could try to hijack my system, basically. And so I sort of had to work around that with my demo, but if you anticipate having like a web view-based or browser-based SCIM client, then this is something that you will need to do. And it's not hard. You just need to return a few extra headers, basically, on your requests. And All right. Any questions before we move on to the 1.0, 2.0 differences? No? Okay, so there were a number of changes in 2.0, and some of them were non-backwards compatible changes. We had to do that to bring in some of the features and fill some of the holes that were missing. And so in SCIM 1.1, with regards to extensibility, all we had was a schemas endpoint. And it was sort of a mixture of the resource type information, what endpoint you went to, as well as information about the schema. In 2.0, we split that apart. We took the schemas endpoint, split it in two, and now there's a resource types endpoint and a schemas endpoint that relate to each other. So resource type says, this is the name of the object, these are the schemas that we use, here's the endpoint that you hit to get to this object, and the schemas just have all the information about the attributes that are handled by that type of object. References were a new thing in 2.0. In 1.1, we sort of had this concept of references, like in the enterprise user schema, there's a manager field, and the manager field kind of pointed to another user as your manager. But there was no meta information, no way to understand what that reference meant. It was just kind of, you had to know what the spec said about manager, and so to figure out how to go and actually get that manager and things like that. So we sort of hardened that up. We created this concept of a reference, and it's really just a URL. It's a URL to something. It can be an external resource. Typically, the typical case is for another object internally. It can be an absolute path, like this example here, for this group's reference, or it can be a relative path as well. So it could be like /groups and then the ID. We made some changes to our patch syntax. I don't know that anybody implemented it in 1.1 anyway. Maybe there was one server. But we changed it to use more of a JSON patch-like syntax. It's not exactly JSON patch, but it's close to it, with the hope being that we could simplify some things. I think we still might need to try to simplify stuff a little bit more, as we found in the interop, but we'll see where that goes. For the example of what we're doing in 2.0, though, this is an example of patching a group. It's a list of patch operations, so it's kind of like perform these changes to this object, and that can be, add a new attribute, replace an attribute value, or remove an attribute's value if you want to remove somebody from a group or add somebody to a group. So this one is saying add this user, Babs Jensen, add her to this group. The operation is equal to add. The path is members. That's the name of the attribute and groups that we want to add her to. And the value is this reference to her. Okay, secure searching is another new thing. This came about, can anyone tell me what's problematic with that top one there? Anything seem a little wrong there? Yeah, you can, Pam.
Well, there's a social security number in the actual address that you're calling.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's mine. That's not you. No. Yeah. Yeah, the problem with this sort of thing is that servers actually log their traffic that goes through them, including proxy servers. So anything that's on the URL can get leaked, which might cause some people to not be too happy with it. So we added this safe search, secure search, where instead of using a get with query params to specify your filtering, you use a post, and you post to /users .search. And inside the body of that post, you have the same things that you would have included on the query params. So the attributes that you want to return in your search, the filter to use. So social security number is safe and sound in here. little feedback? Kind of hummy? Awesome. So all the stuff you would have put on the query string goes into this request body instead. So that's good. What else? The me endpoint. So like I said, this is just like the user info endpoint, basically. If you're authenticated as a person and you go to /me, it will return you your information. We actually heard a really interesting use case yesterday, or Monday, I guess, where people were using this, and this isn't in the spec, but we could see an extension coming here at some point, where people were using this for sort of like a just-in-time provisioning. So what they would do is they would hit the me resource with a token in their authorization header that had enough information on the user so that their system could go and perform a delegated authorization on another system, suck the data back in, and sort of bootstrap their SCIM user doing that. So it's another use case that we may see coming along here. It's kind of neat. So real simple, same response body that you get when you just get a regular user. And finally, there's more information in schemas. There's stuff that dictates how attributes behave, whether they're mutable or not, and what kind of mutability they have, whether they get returned by default, or if you have to request them, or if they never get returned, like a password, never return that back, even if somebody asks for it. Whether it is a unique attribute or not, and also reference types. So this comes with that new reference data type. You can specify what reference types are coming back with or are applicable for a given attribute. So let's talk the last bit about extensions, and we'll kind of get into some examples that can help show you, if you want to create extensions, how to do it. And it's actually really, really simple. So first of all, the reason that extensions work in SCIM is because SCIM is kind of built around this Postel's law, coined by John Postel. It is also known as the robustness principle, and it was created when he was writing specifications for TCP. And you want network traffic to be resilient and be able to work if you got a lot of different components talking together, right? And you want it to be able to work even if everything's not exactly as you expect. So the law is to be conservative in what you do. So when I'm writing a server, I want to be real strict about what I'm sending back to the client, send really good data back, but be liberal in what you accept from others. So when people send me a new identity or user to create, if there's some garbage in there, I can still handle it gracefully, right? So here we go. We're going to talk through creating a new resource type. And what we're going to do is have the internet-enabled toaster. And I was looking for images, and I found there's actually, I don't know if Darth is actually internet-enabled, but it's pretty neat anyway. So there's just two things you need to do if you want to add a new resource type. One is that your resource type's endpoint needs to now return the new resource type that you're adding, right? So when somebody goes and asks for the resource types, you need to say, here's a new one. It's called Toaster, along with users and groups and all the other stuff you support. You also have to add the schemas that are going to support this new resource type to your schemas endpoint. So let's look at what that looks like. The first part is a lot of JSON, but this is your new Toaster resource type. Interesting bits here. We have the endpoint. This tells the client, what URL do I hit to go get the toasters. It also has a couple of schema things in it. One is a schema field, and this has the URN of the primary schema for this object. And that means that if you are a toaster object, you will have a toaster schema. You will have the toaster schema. The next part about schemas is schema extensions. And this is a multi-valued list. You can have as many of these as you want. And these are extensions to your toaster schema, right? And you can set them up so that they are either required, so that when a user creates a toaster, they have to have the egg cooker on there also. This is so crazy. I saw a toaster online that toasted bread, and it had this little cup thing on the side that would cook the egg for you too. It was pretty ridiculous. So it's pretty awesome, yeah. We need the bacon griddle on there too, and we'll be all set. Breakfast sandwich. Yeah, there you go. So this one just has a single extension schema. It's optional. If you don't want a toaster with an egg cooker attached, you don't have to have it. If you want it, you can have it. Next is the toaster schema. So this is even more JSON, but a lot of it's sort of copy and paste sort of stuff. Interesting bits here, the ID. This is the URN that was referenced back in our resource type. So the resource type references the toaster by its URN, and this needs to be unique. And then it has a list of attributes that it supports. When you have a toaster, we have an IP address. So how do we talk to the toaster? There is a state. Is it cooking? Is it idle? Is it broken? Whatever. And there's also darkness. How dark do you like your toast? And here's our egg cooker schema. It looks just the same as a toaster schema. So any schema is going to look the same. It's just up to the resource type about whether it wants it to be primary or an extension or required or not. So here's our egg cooker. It's got a state. It has a style. What kind of style do you want your egg? Raw, over easy, or animal style? I like animal style. So let's look at how you do this now. So you've created a server, you've added your resource type, you've added your schemas to support this toaster resource type, and you want to go look at your toasters. So you go and you do a get from /toasters, and it comes back with a response with a list of toasters, right? Here's your new toasters. That's tiny font, so I'll kind of break it down. This first bit is the list response. For any search that you do, it returns as a list response, and it has sort of the pagination type parameters in it. The next bit is the actual toaster. And so you'll see it says that this instance of this toaster is using two schemas, the toaster and the egg cooker. This is our premier version of the toaster. There may be another toaster that doesn't have the egg cooker attached, but this one does. So with it, it's got its IP address, how idle what the state is, and what darkness you like your toast. And finally, there's the egg cooker down at the bottom. You'll see that you can kind of see this a little bit over there. It's the way that extensions are included in objects is that the URN of the extension schema is used kind of as the attribute name, and then all the attributes in that schema fall under that. So finally, let's put our toaster to work. We're going to make toast. So how would you do this? There's actually IoT type implications through SCIM as well, because you can model devices, and some people are actually starting to do this where they're using SCIM to change the state or read the state of devices. No toasters that I know of yet to do this, but I'm working on one in the garage. So let's say you want to make some toast, right? You do a patch. Patch is another thing. I don't know if Pam went over or not, but it's essentially you want to update the toaster, but you don't want to replace the full toaster. You just want to update a couple pieces of it. And so what we're doing is we're saying patch our Vader toaster. We're going to replace the state with cooking. Just going to click down, get your toast in there. We're going to replace our darkness with the perfect darkness, 7.2 on a scale of 10. Have a nice golden brown piece of toast. And lo and behold, what do we get? It's amazing. All right, I'm almost out of time, but I've barely got any content left, so that kind of works out pretty well. So the last thing that you can do with extensions, if you don't want to create a new resource type, you can take existing resource types and extend them. So in this case, we're going to take the user resource type, And we're going to add a field onto the user that says, what is this user's toaster? What's their favorite toaster to use? And so to do this, you need to add this schema, this extension to /schemas, and then you need to go to the resource type for user, the resource type definition for user, and add this new schema as a schema extension. Pretty simple. So here's the My Toaster schema, and all it has is a single complex attribute that has a reference in it that points to a toaster. So, and as you can see, there's reference types are toaster, so it can only point to toasters. And then you go and you extend the resource type. We take the normal user's resource type and we add schema extensions to it. And we add our My Toaster schema. It's not required. Not everybody is lucky enough to have an internet-enabled toaster, so you don't have to have this. And this is what it looks like on a user. You have Barbara Jensen, and she actually owns that fancy Vader toaster that we were just looking at. So we just made her some delicious toast. Okay, and that's all I got now. So let me open it up for questions if people have some.
You roll back to not the toaster schema modification, but the schema modification?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Which one?
Yeah, right there.
The My Toaster?
No, thank you.
So actually, there's a good point about this. So one thing that, one thing about this approach that tripped me up was actually thinking that you took the user schema and then mashed the toaster schema into that as well, but instead you use the schema extension part of the schema to just declare it. So you'll get all of your schemas against the schema endpoint as opposed to sort of nesting them, if you will. So that was one little thing that got me up, that tripped us.
Yeah. The interesting bit there is that you can actually share schemas amongst multiple resource types. So if you have some common information across groups and users, you could just create one schema and register it as an extension for both of those resource types.
And are these schemas in JSON schema format? I mean, there's a kind of a pseudo standard.
Yeah, not really. That wasn't really around when we started doing SCIM. So this is sort of our SCIM version of schema. Oh, sorry. The question was whether these schemas are in JSON schema format, and the answer is no, they're not. Go ahead.
Do you have a validator? Schema validator?
No, that's a really good idea, though. I think we should. I think we should add that. Yeah, what's up?
So could you talk a little bit about external references where the resource on the other end might be secured? Because I was trying to figure out from reading the spec there, what I could do about that.
Are you talking about it like like a photo URL or something?
Photo, except that it's secured.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. The question is about external resources. For example, like a profile URL or a photo URL. And if it is secured externally, how do you deal with that? Interesting you ask. I actually bumped into that in the app that I built because I was reading the photo URL out of the user and trying to show it on that user list, and it was failing because it required authorization to get there. And so I don't really know the answer for that. I would assume that the client that's making use of that needs to have authorization, some sort of authorization token that allows them to access that resource.
I guess I've just been thinking about the various paths there. I mean, I don't necessarily want to give a forever token to
Right.
that resource, but then if it expires, like, what's the expectation?
Yeah. Yeah. What else? Yeah, what's up?
Just a clarification on the batch
Uh-huh.
operation. So
Yeah.
is it on the user data or is it on the metadata or on both? It can be done.
It is on the user data. So, or any resource type. It could be on a user or on a group. But what you're saying is I want to, sorry, the question was with patch, are you operating on the metadata or on the actual user data? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so it's on the actual data of the user. The initial use case for patch was, we started with put, which means I'm handing you the entire object, and I want you to replace what you have with that. And it works well for small objects that don't change very often. Where that kind of falls apart, for us, the first case we saw it was with our group model. With groups, membership is managed on the group itself. So you may have a group with 10,000 members that changes, once a minute or something like that, right? So instead of saying, I've got this group object with 10,000 members, and now it's got 10,001, and I'm going to put it, what you do is you create a patch operation, and you say, I want to add, my patch operation is going to be add. The path is going to be the members attribute, so I'm adding it to the members attribute on the group, and then the value that I'm adding is that new user. Does that make sense?
Yep, yep. And if I need to change the metadata, what is the process that I need to do? Like if I need to add a new attribute, say to the toaster schema?
So you're talking about if you want to actually change the schema and stuff like that?
Schema.
Yeah, so the SCIM spec says that /resource types, /schemas, and /service providers are all read-only. And so there's really not, or I guess the spec doesn't call for a way to be able to update those through a SCIM API. I could see something like that working for sure, but I think what we've seen in the past is that, if a server wants to extend something or add a new resource type, they kind of do it behind the scenes.
Was that the question, or the question was you wanted to extend the meta?
Extend the metadata.
Right, that's
Oh,
slightly different.
How do you extend the metadata for a user?
So for the toaster,
Mhm.
there are like a certain list of attributes which are present in the schema.
Right.
So if I want to add a couple of new attributes,
Right,
and define them, okay, the string, it accepts this value and everything.
right.
How do I go about it?
So if you wanted to add like the wattage of the toaster or
Yeah,
something
for
like that,
instance,
yeah. So right now there's no way for a client to do that. It has to be someone that kind of owns the server dealing with that on the back end.
Think of the meta attribute as operational attributes in the old LDAP days, right? Thank you. Think of metadata as meta attributes as similar to the operational attributes that LDAP had, which is essentially server controlled, not client controlled. These are the things that the server decides what does it mean, how to control it, and if there's no way of extending it other than server implementation.
Advanced attributes,
Is that
calculated attributes.
Not necessarily. They may be calculated attribute, but as I said, they're more operational. It's the operation of the server that decides how to manage it, not sort of the clients.
You wanted to follow up, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm trying to understand the schema extension. So the user schema can have a toaster schema. So is it like it's an additional attribute for the toaster? Because my question is, if I want to create, say, 1,000 resource types,
Right.
okay, all of them are of a certain type. So in comparing to Java, like I have an interface and I just want to create 1,000 different resource types of that interface. So is it possible, instead of me typing the same attributes, same metadata, 100 or 1,000 different times, can I say that I want to create a resource type which is of type A, and
Yes, yeah, so you're asking if there's the same schema that's shared across many resource types that all look the same? Is that right?
so I want to create separate resource types, but inside that resource type, it's all the same metadata, but I want to call it a separate different resource type.
Yeah, so the way that you do that is you would add the metadata or the schema information, you'd add a new schema to /schemas that has that, and then you'd create your 1,000 new resource types, and they would all list that one schema as their primary schema.
Okay.
All right, I think we better call it.
Yep, happy to answer questions afterward too.
Yeah, we can answer questions afterwards, and so we're just over your time. But I think that for what we had, that was an hour, last time, so that should be okay. Do we want to give people like a 5-minute bio break? And then we'll come back and do the schema interop for anyone who wants to come back? Okay, see you in 5. Thanks, Kelly.